right.
Welcome to Borås.
I'm glad to be there virtually.
Yeah.
So, as Nora was saying, the world is going to be both analog and digital, and we're playing in the digital world today.
Yes. Where are you as you speak or as we speak?
As we speak right now, I'm in Milan, Italy.
Nice. I
Yeah.
hope. Yeah.
Well, they're having some problems
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So let's not waste any time. Please tell us what you're going to speak about.
Great. So today I'm here. I appreciate the invite. I'm glad to be able to speak with everyone today. We're going to talk about a project from Accelerating Circularity. A little bit about the organization. Accelerating Circularity is a US-based nonprofit organization. Our mission is to divert spent textiles from landfill for textile to textile recycling. And we have a few things that we think are incredibly important when we talk about circularity. First, I want to be clear that we're talking about textile to textile circularity. And so we know that there are other types of circularity, but for accelerating circularity, this is our focus. We believe that doing this and trying to make change at scale is incredibly important. We understand the need when we talk about digitalization. The need for digital information is going to help this be possible. Accelerating Circularity was started because I felt like everybody was talking about circularity, and I got on my soapbox and said, hey, we know today that circularity is really not something that is A, scaled, and B, really in wide use. And so I gathered together some people. We believe very strongly in collaboration, and we decided that we would create this project. And we're very lucky to be supported by brands, retailers. We also have a grant from the Walmart Foundation. So Gap, Target, VF in the United States are sponsoring us. And then they're also, other than the Walmart Foundation, Gap, Target, and VF are also part of our founding partners. So when we decided that we needed to have a working group to move towards circularity, we felt like it was important to have brands and retailers that were large because we needed to have the scale to make real difference. We also felt like it was really important for us to include the supply chain. So Lensing, who is a maker of Tencel, and also Refibra, which today is a chemically recycled lyocell product. We have Geotex, which is a mechanical cotton recycler. Green, which is a chemical polyester recycler in the commercialization process. And Unify, which does polyester and nylons, and they also do mechanical recycling. So we felt like we needed to have this big scope for this project to be able to actually make the change. If we're going to accelerate circularity, we needed to have the players that had the expertise, the knowledge, and the capability. So as a group, this group that you see here under founding partners, we meet on a regular basis. We meet monthly. And the idea is it would be a small, tight group that had the ability to execute on a strategy to actually make change when it came to circular supply chain. But because it's a small group, there's only about 10 of us all together, we also felt like we needed to make sure that we engage the larger market. So we have also gathered together what we call our collaborating organizations. So we work with other organizations like the United States Fashion Industry Association, American Apparel and Footwear Association, the Outdoor Industry Association in the United States, and the Renewal Workshop. So these are people that do work somewhat differently than we do. We want to make sure that we're able to share information, that we're able to ask questions of one another, and also be sure that we're not doing duplicative work. There are a lot of organizations out there working in the space of sustainability and circularity, and we felt like it was important for us to work and collaborate with as many people as possible. So what we did when we developed Accelerating Circularity is we decided that we had to create a scope. The scope of our work is the East Coast of the United States. And there were a couple of reasons why we chose the East Coast of the United States. One, it has a very high population concentration, and that's going to mean post-consumer textiles. Two, it has a textile industry that still exists on the East Coast, so that's going to help us look at post-industrial textiles. We also had to select what fibers and we were going to address, and we chose polyester, cotton, and man-made cellulosics. The reason behind that is that's basically about 81% of the fiber market. And certainly you can't address everything, but by addressing these three fibers, we're addressing a large portion of the market. We talked about where we focused in terms of the post-industrial and the post-consumer waste. We also had to look at who would be participating in this and who we wanted to include. And so when it comes to brands and retailers, obviously there are no geographic limitations within the United States. So that's, we focused on all US brands and retailers. When we look at the overall supply chain, when we were talking to people, we recognized that while we have fiber companies, fabric companies, garment makers on the East Coast of the United States, we also understood that much of the fiber and yarns that get produced in the United States also get shipped to places like the Caribbean Basin, Mexico, and Central America. So we also felt like it was important for us when we start thinking about the entire circle that we kept our minds open and looked in those areas as well. And when it comes to the recycling technologies, the people that are going to pull this work together, we're looking at both mechanical and chemical recycling. And obviously, that focused on the fibers that we're using. So when it comes to accelerating circularity, this is the Accelerating Circularity Circle. We use this image to help us explain what we think is important and also explain where accelerating circularity works on our textile to textile supply chains. There's a couple of things here that are really important. One, we show this so that you can see easily that the supply chain to function and to be circular, we need to understand what goes into and out of, because these things are consecutive, what goes into and out of each step in the supply chain, and that we need to collaborate with all of these organizations. You're going to hear me use the word over and over again, collaborate. It also lets us understand that if you look at the turquoise on the outside, you can see things like swap and repair and reuse. Those are absolutely elements of a circular supply chain. They are not areas that accelerating circularity is focused on, because we're focused on the textile to textile part of things. But we understand, obviously, the consumer, they're going to be the suppliers of our raw materials. So they bleed into the work that we do, but they are not the focus of our work. You can also see by the purple existing supply chain, you can see that those segments are all connected, right? From fiber company, yarn spinner, all the way through to the retailer. That's connected today. That works, and it functions. But then as we start to look at some of the other areas, when we start to think about textile collection, sorting, pre-processing, you can see it's not connected. You know, that white space there shows that it's not connected to the rest of a circular supply chain. We also look at unsold garments. That can be quite a large market. That needs to also feed back in to collecting, sorting in those areas, as does post-industrial waste, which again, today doesn't feed back into the existing supply chain. And these things are incredibly important if we're going to create circular supply chains, and we're going to create those circular supply chains at scale. So let's take a walk through the virtual textile to textile supply chain. We like to think of them as supply systems. because we want to create systems. Without the systems, without thinking of this in terms of systems, it's not going to work. So now we're focusing on the scope that we had set for ourselves, the East Coast of the United States. And we started to look at where materials are generated. So we see post-industrial spent textiles. Here we have numbers in tons. We looked at NAICS codes. NAICS codes are something that the US government assigns to different types of businesses. And you can see over, what do we have here? 5 or 6 different NAICS codes, the volumes that we believe they are generated and turning into materials that will go to landfill. A couple of things that are of note here. We typically, in the garment industry, everybody here in the garment industry knows that when we're cutting our garments out of the fabrics in today's world, typically somewhere between, 2 or 5, some people claim such really great yields, but all the way up to 20% of that material lands on the cutting room floor. But you can see here, it's actually quite a small number. There's 2 reasons for that. One is there aren't a lot of cut and sew facilities on the East Coast of the United States. And then 2, some of those materials that are made actually get shipped, as we had said earlier, to the other places in the Western Hemisphere. And so the waste then is generated in other regions. But where we see significant amounts of material are at fabric mills, finishing and coating mills, and then other textile product mills, things like textile bags and canvas mills. But what we've come to here is about 90,000 tons of materials. That's really, it's not considering when we look at the numbers in post-consumer. Now we're talking, instead of thousands of tons, we're talking about millions of tons. So the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency actually talks about, I think the year is 2017, they did some research. They came up with a number of 16.9 million tons that's generated across the entire United States. We took that number and looked at it for the East Coast, the area that we are focusing on, and we came up with a number of 7.7 million tons that was generated. But then we had to look at what the EPA considered in those materials. And they included in those materials things like carpeting and footwear, and we knew that that wasn't going to be within our scope. So we took that material out, and then we ended up with 6 million tons. Now, you see another figure on the screen there of 5.2 million tons, and that's because we know today from the EPA estimates that about 14% of the materials that are collected today, the materials that are generated, actually already get diverted. So we're left in our region with post-consumer spent textiles of 5.2 million tons. So obviously post-consumer in our region versus the post-industrial, we'd like to use both of those materials because we want to use as much as we possibly can. But both of those materials, the post-consumer far outweighs the post-industrial availability of materials. So if we look at that 14% that's taken out today and want to know where it goes, today it goes to reuse. It goes to wipers. Wipers, many of you may know, wipers are actually materials that get taken, they get cut into squares, and they're used for industries that need to clean and polish things. Another 2.5% actually goes to fiber and shoddy. We've all heard the numbers of how small the percentage of materials that actually go back into fiber today. It's incredibly small. And that number, that 2.5%, goes to both fiber and shoddy. I've heard quite a bit about 1% actually goes into textile recycling. And unfortunately, 1% of that collected waste that gets diverted ends up going back into landfill or incineration based on issues such as cleanliness. But so if we take 86%, that 5.2 million tons, and we look at that and we want to create a circular supply chains, we're going to need to be able to, A, pull more of that material, divert more of that material from landfill, and then to be able to recycle it, right? We're not going to be able to divert it unless we have a business case. And this is where we start looking at the business case for circular supply chains and how we get companies to want to, A, collect, sort, and pre-process materials, right? And there's got to be able to divert it. So 35% of that material we believe is readily recyclable, right? We believe that if that material were diverted, we could recycle it. And we can recycle it for a number of reasons. First of all, we know what's in the fiber content. There's approximately 10% of 100% cotton material. 100% cotton is a very valuable material. It's easy to turn into wipers. It's easy to turn into mechanical recycling. And it actually even supports chemical recycling, right? Chemical recycling is going to be using some of the same feedstocks. So 100% cotton is a great material to have. The next category is cotton, high cotton content. So something over 50% cotton with polyester, but nothing else, right? We need to be able to know that it's cotton with polyester. Again, that can go into some mechanical recycling technologies. We know that there are some chemical technologies out there that can take cotton and polyester as long as there aren't other contaminants or restrictions in that material. And then there's about 7% fiber that's pure polyester. And again, back to mechanical recyclers or for new chemical recyclers that are looking to pump up the materials. The more of a pure material that goes into a chemical recycling stream, the higher their return on investment is, because when they have to, if they're looking for polyester and they have to, there are blends in there, then the return on investment is less if they can't use the other materials that are in there. We have another 45% that we say are potentially recyclable. And it's potentially recyclable because we're waiting and looking for the commercialization of new technologies that can take a broader array of fiber inputs. Can it take some elastane? Can it take nylon? And so these are going to determine whether or not we can recycle this additional 45%. Now, it's not just the recyclers that need to commercialize. We also need to commercialize the sorting technology so that we're very clear on what exactly it is in those materials. So 17% of that 45% we believe is cotton rich. Again, cotton rich is a very good thing, but depending upon what that other is, whether there are restrictions against the materials that are in there, will determine whether or not it's recyclable. And then another 22% is polyester rich with other materials in there. And again, it'll determine whether or not it's recyclable. And then there's 6% other fibers and blends that are also potentially recyclable. We didn't intentionally pull out wool. It's a very small number, but wool we know is recyclable. And it's one of the things that are have been recycled for ages. In the end, there's another 20% that's pretty likely not to be recyclable. And there is 5% that's going to come into soil that's been wet, it's got moldy, it's got oils on it. Those will just not go through a recycling system. And then there's another 15% that potentially have things like coatings and finishes. For the outdoor industry, that's a really big deal. But they have to know what the coatings, the finishes, the laminates that might make something non-recyclable. Also, there are certain fibers, I've mentioned elastane already, that tend to be problematic for many, but there are also things like metallic fibers. I don't, at this point in time, know of a single recycler that actually can take a metallic yarn. So moving on in our virtual circular supply chain, One of the things that Accelerating Circularity did, and you can go to our website and see these, and for those of you who are interested and like to get into the details, if you go to acceleratingcircularity.org/research, you can find these interactive maps. And what these interactive maps allow you to do is to go in and to see on the East Coast of the United States exactly where you can find sorters and who the sorters are. So you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, I've clicked on here on thrift collection bin operators and curbside collection operators. And you can see where they're scattered around the East Coast of the United States. If you click on the buttons, which aren't live here, but if you're in the system, you can click on the buttons and you can see, who it is, where they're located specifically, and what they can do. For us, when we're talking about scaling the circular supply chain, it's important for us to understand whether or not the systems, back to systems, are there. And certainly you can see that we have quite a number of collectors, but if we're talking about growing, we're talking about dealing with that 5.2 million tons, we're probably going to need more. These people today are doing it for the markets that they have today, and we want to see those markets grow. In collecting, we see that it will be an easy thing for us to scale and grow. We're not concerned about this segment. We've talked to people that feel they can expand their business. We're talking to people who feel like they can move into this business relatively easily. However, when it comes to, hold on a second. When it comes to sorters, which we've clicked on here, you can see we're now down to very few little dots on the map. Sorters are what we look at and we know that it's a gap, but it's also an opportunity. So we've opened up our scope a little bit just so that we can make sure that we can have people that would be able to sort materials. And we know that after this research that we've done, our goal is to run pilots and validate the system. So we've opened it up a little bit. We see where there are sorters, but we also see, as I said, this is a gap. We need to have more sorters. We need to have people that have the technologies that are able to sort. One thing that we're doing as an organization is we've convened a group of players in the marketplace, and we're looking at creating a sorting specification matrix. And that matrix will help collectors, sorters, and aggregators understand how to sort materials. And this we also think will help people want to get into this marketplace. And when it comes to pre-processing is things like removing buttons and zippers and hang tags, potentially right-sizing the materials and sanitizing them. So these are the pre-processing steps that are going to allow for moving into the recycling stream. And you can see that this is another gap and another opportunity, hopefully, for new businesses and employment opportunities. But you can see that we have very few companies in the United States in general, never mind the East Coast, that are able to do these pre-processing steps. A big part of our research and why we've chosen to do this is so that we are able to identify what are the gaps, what do we need to do to create the links that will make for circular supply chains. So as we're moving through now, we've got our material. Hopefully it's been sorted properly, it's been pre-processed, and now we need to recycle it. You can see we have both global numbers for the number of recyclers by recycler type here, as well in the United States. And we can see, and we all probably knew this instinctively in the industry because mechanical recycling has been around for some time, that mechanical cellulosic and mechanical polyester recyclers are the most common type of recyclers that are available today, and also commercial at scale. Now, I know a lot of people feel like, well, when it comes to cotton recycling, maybe the technology isn't as good as we'd like it to be. But the truth is if we're able to get them more materials and we're able to get them to scale, we will start developing the systems that are going to allow for more materials to get diverted out of landfill, for more materials to be diverted to other types of recycling. It's sort of the developmental step along the way. And I think actually there will be mechanical recyclers will be useful for years to come. We've learned from one of our working group members, Geotex, that they're now able to create 100% recycled cotton yarns. It's a great thing. I mean, in the past, often they would blend it with other materials so that they could have the strength. And now they found ways to do that. So we have the strength and they can make yarns, turn it into a product, and now it will maintain its ability to be circular because it is 100% cotton. One of the things that we need to talk about here, though, is when we look at the recyclers, we often think primarily about fiber as a restriction. But this is where we start asking the industry for help. So, as you recall, I mentioned a bit ago about matrix for recyclers. We're actually asking people to take a look at this matrix and give us feedback. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. But restrictions come in a variety of ways. We are looking at fiber, certainly one of the most common restrictions. We know that elastane is one of the restrictions mentioned most frequently. You can see on this chart in the world, elastane is the most restricted fibers from all of the recycling technologies that are out there, with nylon and metals right behind. When it comes to the United States, it's acrylic and elastane, and again, nylon and metal. So these are common things. But it's not only fiber. Color can be an issue. And color is an issue, you know, we think of that as a mechanical recycling issue where people, when it comes to cotton, they will separate by fiber and then you get a heather fabric. But even in mechanical polyester recycling, you end up often with a black yarn because you get this gray as you're mixing colors. And so they dope dye it with some black chip that allows them to get a black yarn. Now, we can't use only black, and so we need to find the ability to deal with color. And it's also true, interestingly enough, in some of the chemical recycling technologies. Some chemical recycling technologies do not take out the dye stuff, so color is also an issue for them. And then format. Can a recycling technology take a whole garment? Can they take a part of a garment? Do they need the material to be shredded? So these are all elements that affect how something can be recycled. And then even construction, material construction. So is it a knit or is it a woven? Is it a lightweight woven or a heavyweight woven? I know one company that can take woven materials, but they can't take denim because it's too heavyweight and it doesn't fit in their system. So these are the kinds of things that we need to think of when we're thinking about circularity, when we're thinking about recyclability, and what it's going to take for us to create circular supply chains at scale. So once we recycle these materials, then we need to make some product. And in our work, what we did is we talked to brands and retailers, we did a survey, and we looked at what they're currently sourcing in the Western Hemisphere. We also asked them, what are they targeting for circular products? And then what we did, we were able to come to the middle and see what our crossover was. And you can see the list here: denim, knit tees, home textiles, activewear, outerwear, and hotel linens. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we also then went into the supply chain and validated this information, what is really being made here. So now we know what kinds of products that we can make as we start to think about moving into doing actual pilots. And then who's going to buy this, right? I talked earlier about the business case. And we need to have a business case all along the way. We need collectors to be able to sell to sorters, sorters to sell to preprocessors, or preprocessors to sell into the chemical and mechanical recyclers. We're also going to need the supply chain that it is today to have brands and retailers who are willing to buy these recycled materials. And certainly there have been a huge number of companies who have made circular commitments. And then there's been even more who are making commitments about the use of recycled materials, because that's a critical part of a circular supply chain. For instance, the F Corporation, one of our working group partners, have committed to 50% recycled poly by 2025. An even bigger commitment is Inditex, who has 100% commitment to recycled polyester by 2025. So we believe that the will is there to create circular textile supply chains. I'd like to, as we're getting ready to sign off here, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a book I read a long time ago, but is so relevant now, and I'm sure many of you heard of it. But it's the book Cradle to Cradle, which is now an institute. But when that book first came out, I was very struck by a story that talks about trees and how in the spring, trees put forth new leaves, and these leaves collect the sun, create the nutrients for the tree to thrive. And when fall rolls around, those leaves fall to the ground and again provide nutrients to the tree over the course of the winter. I would love to see that clothes become our nutrients, protecting us from the elements, providing us nourishment, and then be able to be used again once they're no longer wearable, and becoming feedstock for the future so that we can wear them again in a new incarnation. So with that, I'd like to ask you for some help back to the idea of being digital. Brands and retailers, we really need your help when it comes to telling us what's in your product. What are those fibers? What's going to become our feedstocks? And we need to know by fiber content. So if you go to our website, acceleratingcircularity.org/research, you'll see our call to action. And in there's a form that you can fill out, and you can say what percent of your material is 100% cotton or 100% polyester, or an 80% cotton, 20% polyester blend, or some version of that kind of thing. Collectors and sorters, we're working on the matrix that I told you about, and then preprocessors. What are the services? And for the recyclers, even they need to provide us with a categorization. We need to understand what goes into and out of, and if we can share that with the industry, we can create circular supply chains. As Nelson Mandela says, it always seems impossible until it's done. So thank you. I appreciate your time today. If anyone wants to reach out, there's my contact information.
Thank you, Karla. Really interesting. Could you tell us, there are a lot of initiatives from the industry right now. What's the really different thing about accelerating circularity?
I think probably the biggest difference of accelerating circularity is the fact that we're actually a pretty small group of people. And rather than having asked the entire industry to join us and pay membership dues, we decided that we would take into consideration as many things as we felt was important to create change and to get on the path to circularity, and that we would share that information with the industry. And then we work, as I had mentioned earlier, with those collaborating organizations that allow us to make sure that we have access to information and that they have access to us through questions. And then as we recently did, you can see on that web address that I gave you, we recently published a report that has a lot more detail than what we're able to cover today.
Okay. And why is accelerating circularity focused on the system perspective?
Because without a system, this isn't going to happen. So we actually work with every part. I think you could see that. I tried to show that in this presentation. We're working with as many people as possible. Today, the supply chain works because everybody knows, if you call the yarn guy, what comes out the other end. And where that goes. And we don't have that information so clearly defined today. And then when it comes to circularity, we want to start being aware that when the consumers are done, or customers, I think people felt that consumer wasn't a good terminology, that when people are done with their garments, that they know where to send them. I think that reuse and resale are incredibly important. They certainly speak to the hierarchy of waste, where the best thing you can do is to reuse it. But at some point in time, grandma's garments, as Christiane said, it's going to have to be recycled. It won't probably live forever. We hope it lives as long as it can. But once it's no longer usable, we need to have a place for that to go. And it needs to be able to go into a system, and we hope that it stays in the system.
And will you run any projects in any other regions?
Yeah, we have been talking to people in other areas. There's been a conversation about starting a project in Europe. And you can see by the work that we did how regional things can be, how much waste is there. What are the facilities that can deal with the waste, and where new products can be made? What is going to be, in a sense, the diameter of the circle? So expanding this, we believe that what we're doing now will create models that can be executed in other geographies. Even the West Coast of the United States, California, is having some conversations about getting serious with textile wastes and textiles.
Okay, great. Pierre, we have the possibility of, we have some time. Do anyone in the audience have a question for Clara? Someone? No? Pardon? Apparently not. I think we covered it all. Thank you, Karla, for joining us.